Hello, everyone. I'm John Coleman from Apocrypha Stacey's, an Institute for the Humanities, an alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut. This recording is our latest installment of A Conversation With. Today, joined by Michael Benner. How are you doing, Michael?
I'm doing great, John. Thank you.
Great, that's good to hear. And we're going to get into, in this recording, Michael's book on fear and fearlessness and overcoming the negative aspects of fear, and we're going to get right into this topic here, but not before the obligatory plug. And of course, we can see Michael's site down below, and everyone will duly check that out. But concerning Apocrypha Stacey's, I bring everyone's attention to our philosophy page on our main website, Apocrypha Stacey's Institute.wordpress.com. Down on the ticker, we have the recently revised philosophy section, and you can understand our pedagogy and our approach to learning in the classroom and beyond the classroom at that webpage. With that plug being seen to, Michael, would you tell us a bit about yourself?
Well, thank you. I guess I have to start with the journalism side. I came out of Michigan State University with a degree in broadcast journalism. It was really broadcast management with a minor in journalism. And I was already working at a local radio station in Lansing, and went to Detroit shortly after graduation, and a few years later to Los Angeles, and did radio news, a little bit of DJ work, mostly radio news and talk shows at a variety of radio stations, KABC, KLOS, KCBS, a number of others, over a 20 or 25-year period. And, when you get to be about 40 years old in radio, you you begin to realize it's a young guy's game. And my dreams of being Walter Cronkite or something sort of vaporized. So I began to look at a second career. And what kept coming up for me over and over again was my interest in altered states of awareness, meditation, mindfulness, self-hypnosis, and hypnotherapy. And I also was really interested in accelerated learning and relationship management, those personal and transpersonal development fields. So radio became an avocation, and my avocation became my career about 35 years ago. So that's what I've been doing, is counseling and training people in personal and spiritual development.
Great, thank you for that, Michael. And as a radio head myself, I was delighted when I went through your book to hear some of those radio call signals that I've listened to myself in the past, even more recent to your own time in radio there. And it is interesting, just by the by, the revival of audio communication with the internet. You think visual, but with podcasts and so forth, there's been a great revival of just not just storytelling, but communication through hearing, and it was good to hear maybe an earlier generation of that in your book as well, just on the margins.
I've always loved radio. I was an amateur radio, a federally licensed amateur radio operator, a ham radio operator, when I was 12 years old. And the idea of voice going through the ethers magically all around the world. We would talk to people on 100 watts of power, 100 watts. That's a dim light bulb. And yet you could talk around the world if conditions were right. And I loved that. I still do. The magic of radio, the mystery of radio. I'm just infected by it, I guess.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that. Before we get on to your book here, ham radio and shortwave. I've met I met a few guys in my time that really are into that stuff, and when you're into it, you're into it. It's like it's a
Yeah,
whole little world to it.
it's like an infection.
Yes, absolutely. I'm trying to think. The big stations out here would be certainly WABC, and there's an NPR station which escapes me right now, but that's a pretty big one too. So anyway, the radio fire is still plugging along there.
Yeah,
Michael, yes, go on, go on.
I, radio has its problems. I think largely the result of excessive centralization of ownership.
Mm,
And so, if you listen to a radio station in your hometown, you realize pretty quickly that they never mention, the DJs are never talking about your local area. They're all in another city far away. There's a famous story out of North Dakota about 10 years ago. There was a hazardous materials spill.
mm.
The police went to all six of the local radio stations to get them to put out an alert, and every one of them was closed and locked. They were all automated out of New York.
Wow.
Every single one of them in North Dakota. They were all
Yeah.
being run out of New York City, and there was nobody there. And,
Wow. Yeah.
it's
What a commentary on the centralization of media in this country.
yeah, it's a problem. It's a real problem. But
Hmm.
if we could get that decentralized, then people might turn to the radio and hear news and information about their local town, and that would be
Mm.
fun for them and informative. And I think it would really revive the medium.
Yes, absolutely. And later on in this talk, we should return to that in regards to fear and this topic, because there's certainly a great deal of that in the media as well, and certainly in radio. But Michael, what would be, as you were moving, from your, I forget how you phrased it, your vocation in radio to your avocation, or there was some nuance there. But who would be, as you moved into your present track in life, looking at consciousness and so forth, who would be some of the people who've contributed to your worldview and the formation and the focusing of that worldview?
Well, I'd have to begin with Jose Silva.
Mm,
I took his training right out of college. That would have been 1974 in Detroit. And because I had a radio talk show, when he came to town, I was able to interview him, and I met him. So between taking the training and actually meeting him and sitting with him and picking his brain, so to speak, I became fascinated with his approach to basically self-hypnosis,
mm,
manifestation, the Esther Hicks law of attraction stuff. But as I grew and matured, I became less interested in manifesting in the material world, so to speak,
mm,
with consciousness, and more interested in the nature of consciousness itself and
mm,
what happened when I grew it. And I began to understand myself better as I developed consciousness. I found my priorities changing, John,
mm,
and my values began to elevate. I became a nicer person and more loving, frankly,
mm,
and that made me happy. And there were times that anxiety that we all feel, waiting for the other shoe to drop, and the
mm,
result of the rumination we tend to do, and the intrusive thinking, the monkey mind, always being negative, and what horrible problem is going to happen next, and how many different ways can my life go south on me, and oh no, not again. That all began to transform into beginning to feel happy for no reason. That
mm,
was a big breakthrough for me. The realization a couple of decades ago that I did not need a reason to be happy. I was spontaneously more and more happy, and then I began to study fear. Quick story.
Please.
Uh, must have been 35 years ago. I was sitting in meditation,
Mm,
and it was like everything just opened up for a moment for me. I had this epiphany, and this voice said to me, in fact, the voice even used my name. It said, Michael, the best parts of you are hidden where you're most afraid to look.
hmm,
And it was like a bell went off, and I repeated it to myself because I wanted to be sure to remember it. The best parts of you are hidden where you're most afraid to look. Oh my goodness.
mm,
I'm supposed to look at my fear. I'm supposed to be more aware, more conscious of my anxiety and my stress. And instead of avoiding it and pushing away from fear, I need to turn and confront it. Like, I thought at the time of the Robert Frost poem about the roads diverging, and I took the one less traveled.
mm-hmm,
And I thought that's what I need to do is pursue what I fear, which means pursue what I don't know about myself.
mm-hmm,
There's a lot in the world that we don't know, and that's what fear is. Fear is not about danger in my mind. It's about what we don't know.
mm,
So situational awareness is important, but the self-awareness, that was the breakthrough for me. And I studied fear and anxiety, not a very popular topic, as you know. People,
yes.
you can't put out a flag that says study fear here.
Yeah,
But
which is, of course, gallows ironic or gallows humor, since it has such a precedence in our minds and such a presence in our minds.
yeah, so that was a big breakthrough for me. And as I began to study fear, that just meant to me studying what I didn't understand, at the
Mm-hmm,
core of which was myself. And it's just made me happier, more content, more fulfilled. And as I say, it changed my values very much. And so
mm-hmm,
the need to teach it was, well, it became indistinguishable from my own self exploration. So sharing that with other people helped me. A good teacher is always a student, I think.
mm-hmm.
So I'll say that.
Good, good. Thank you for that. And it's interesting, in the educational world myself, I often think about certain of these dynamics, Michael. And one of them is, in the neighborhood of what you just brought up, which is we have all of these schools and all of these hours in the classroom to learn things. And yet we have people by 20 and 30 and 40 and so forth that have these hidden parts in themselves, and our education, for all of its volume, often doesn't direct our attention, as in the early years in particular, to these very, very necessary lessons that you described, that you came across in your own journey.
Yeah, to know thyself. It's the one of the greatest teachings of all ages is the Greek platitude inscribed over the oracle to Apollo at Delphi: "Know thyself."
Mm-hmm.
Imagine going into a place of worship or introspection, and you're cautioned on the way in, "Hey, buddy, this is really about you."
Mm, yeah.
Um, and that's why so many religious leaders tell us not to be so judgmental,
Mm,
because you're not going to understand very much at all about other people if you refuse to study yourself.
mm-hmm.
I think it speaks even more directly to meaning and purpose of life.
Mm, mm-hmm.
It occurs to me, I've always heard since I was a kid that there's no two snowflakes alike.
Yes.
I always thought, how do they know? But apparently, nobody has ever found evidence that the universe is willing to replicate itself.
Mm-hmm.
And we have DNA evidence, and I would say, I'll say fingerprint evidence and DNA proof
Mm-hmm.
that each of us is unique. Well, that to me suggests that there's purpose in that. There's a reason that we're each made unique, that there's nothing redundant about the universe. And it speaks directly to know that uniqueness, know thyself, and spend less time judging other people and controlling other people, and just turn within to self awareness and understanding why you think and feel and act the way you do. And
Mm-hmm.
again, the rewards for that are extraordinarily liberating. Initially, I thought, well, there may be a problem here if I get to know myself. Maybe that I'll find out that the critics were right. Maybe I'll find out I'm a bad person,
Mm.
uh, or a sinner, as I was told in church, corrupt and in need of refinement of some sort. Well, we do need refinement. It's the ego that needs refinement because it's basically of our animal nature, but we have a higher nature that we can unfold, we can develop, sort of the metamorphosis of the caterpillar into the butterfly. And maybe that speaks directly to the whole reason for being, and
Mm.
it certainly fits for me.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And we can always return to this topic there, Michael, about influences. But I'll tell you that it's been quite a while since I heard the name R. Buckminster Fuller. It's been quite a stretch in going through your book today, and in the past couple days, getting ready for this interview. It was good to hear some old familiar names there, and like I say earlier on, some familiar radio stations and so forth. But whilst we can always return to this, are there any other major influences that you'd like to bring up before we get into fearless intelligence itself?
Well, besides Jose Silva, which was my entry point to the field, um, I guess currently the people I look to are people like Eckhart Tolle, Rupert Spira.
Mm,
Ram Dass has always been a big influence on me. Um, there are also some Eastern mystics that I have learned a great deal from. Nisargadatta Maharaj is one. Ramana Maharshi is another. Um, the whole field of self inquiry leads you eventually to more of a spiritual sense of development than personal development. It's a transition from
mm,
who am I as this fleshy sac of protoplasm to how am I connected to the universe. And
mm,
I did a lot of backpacking when I was young. I loved being in nature. I would usually go alone, which is not the smartest thing to do, but I did it anyway. I loved the solitude.
mm,
And it was in nature, John, that I felt connected, so effortlessly connected to
mm,
everything. And the anxiety or fear, if we're going to use the F word, that comes from feeling alienated and separated would vaporize in the woods.
mm,
And I felt a part of everything. Hugging a tree is a real thing, or just sitting under it, or it takes 2 or 3 days out in the wilderness before the frenzy of the city falls away, before you really relax and
mm,
become aware of your surroundings. And it's like nature comes forth in a way that wasn't apparent to you when you first stepped into the woods. But
mm,
like Thoreau and Walden, the longer you're there, the more aware you become. So I think awareness, which is the antidote to fear, um, is a function of relaxation, basically.
Mm,
I think that's why mindful meditation and mindfulness in general is so important to breathe, to relax, to let go of muscular tension, creates physical changes in the brain.
mm,
The overall brainwave frequency reduces. The fight or flight response centered in the amygdala in the brain uh, actually diminishes. Its responsiveness, its
mm,
anxiety diminishes over time. The cluster of neurons in the structure called the amygdala, the fight or flight center, actually atrophies and shrinks.
mm.
Meditators have smaller amygdala than others, and conversely, the reactionary, the person that is always afraid, that's cynical and sarcastic and negative and pessimistic, their amygdala grows. It's bigger physically.
Mm,
So there's something very real about the way deep relaxation, I call it profound relaxation, meditation and introspection and
mm,
contemplation and prayer, all of this slowing things down, breathing, relaxing, that's the antidote and even the cure for high anxiety and the debilitating nature of stress and disease.
mm. Yeah, sometimes it's very, very simple things, just like breathing. And it's interesting, I just off the cuff here, I know from a conversation I had with a newspaper person, a local reporter in a dying breed for sure. This individual told me something. I wonder if you have any anecdotes or insights to in terms of fear and a culture of fear that sometimes is induced by the media. This newspaper person, Michael, had mentioned something that for years before our conversation had always annoyed me. And that is when I would turn on the news in the morning, which wasn't necessarily the smartest thing, but I always noticed without this being brought up that the first story was something horrible, some fire or some car wreck or whatever horrible things. And this individual in our conversation, unrelated to this observation, had mentioned that they were instructed, in fact, as a reporter, to put the police stories and the crime stories and so forth right at the bat in order to get attention on the in their case the newspaper, obviously in this case of the broadcast news on the screen. uh, Having been in radio yourself, have you any observations in that neck of the woods in terms of deliberately pressing those fear buttons in the audience in order to get that attention on them and to build up that unhealthy part of the amygdala?
No question. There is a saying in journalism, rather cynical saying, if it bleeds, it leads. And human beings do have a morbid curiosity. You know, the traffic slows down going by the traffic accident, not because it's still blocking the lane, but everybody wants to look. And
Mm-hmm.
um, the worse the disaster, the worse the tragedy, the more likely we are to fixate on it or even obsess.
Mm,
Fear is a grand motivator. It's used by parents, it's used by teachers, it's used by preachers and priests and imams and
mm,
ministers of all sort. It's used by authority figures in general because fear works. It just
mm-hmm.
extracts a horrible price. Love is the far superior motivator,
Mm,
but it's much more difficult to motivate people with vision, enthusiasm, optimism, love, kindness. Even if you're training animals, you know, those are the two schools of how you train an animal. Are you going to break a horse?
mm,
Are you going to be the horse whisperer? You're going to break the kid's spirit? I had a client once who never felt good enough, and we
Hmm.
began to explore his childhood. And I said, "What did your father do for a living?" And he said, "He breaks horses."
Hmm.
Well, I sat there for a second and let the silence settle in, and I said, "And I guess he broke you too."
Hmm.
And there's no question that fear, politicians do it too. We're coming into an election year.
Hmm.
The negativity of, how many ads do we see for politicians that say nothing about their value or their
Hmm.
vision or their goals or their policies? It's all a negative attack on their opponent. Um, some candidates now holding machine guns, and my
Yes,
God,
yes, I've seen these things.
and so you can say the world's divided into two kinds of people: those that divide the world into two kinds of people, and those who are the lovers,
Mm,
those who seek harmony and unity, and we not only tolerate diversity, we embrace it for the richness that it offers. That's the way I was educated in a liberal arts school.
mm,
Was you embrace diversity, that um, as they say in Hawaii, all from the same rainbow. I love that saying, very
mm,
mystical. We're all from the same rainbow. There's beauty in diversity.
mm.
Why would we want everybody in the world to agree with us? And only one kind of restaurant. Imagine only
Mhm.
if there was no Italian, Chinese, Mexican food, Thai food, that wouldn't be any fun at all. So, yeah, diversity is where it's at.
Great. Yes. Thank you for that, Michael. And yes, in terms of that diversity, we're using, of course, the internet here to record and eventually to broadcast. And I think about a very major search engine whose raison d'etre is to have one answer for anything you type in. That is the telos of Google, in fact, by their one of their owners there, that there will be just one answer for anything you type in. And indeed, we're we're leaning away from that diversity, which gives such insight into life, like that great rainbow quote that you have.
One of the techniques that I teach uh, people who wish to become more self aware
Mm,
and less reactionary is to consider opening the space between stimulus and response.
mm,
Viktor Frankl had a great line in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, where he talks about the space between what's done to us and how we react.
mm,
And in that space, that perception, that awareness is our freedom.
mm-hmm,
But most of us, it's a pretty small space because of the fear and anxiety that suggests there's danger in something that we don't know. So you better react quickly,
mm,
even though we often regret our reflexive reactions. So as we learn to open up that space and consider that we have choices, I have a little 4 bullet point. Um, I'm not sure what to call it, almost like a mantra that we go
mm,
through. Number one, I have choices. John, just to remind yourself that you have choices
mm-hmm,
is a big step toward greater awareness and less anxiety and fear. Number two, there are always more choices than are immediately apparent.
mm,
That speaks to what you're talking about, the nuance, the permutations, the variations,
mm,
the alternatives in between all this and all that.
mm-hmm,
The difference between thinking in absolutes, either or, all or nothing, and exploring the rainbows in between the black and the white, right? So I have choices. There are always more choices than are immediately apparent. My choices are in my perception, my awareness, and my response, not in controlling the stimulus.
Mm,
We want to control other people. We want to control the stimulus. We want to manage what has already happened, what's already downstream. It's sort of
mm,
silly. And we get all red in the face and angry and wave our arms around and threaten and ultimatums and resort to weapons and intimidation to try to control the one thing we cannot control:
mm,
stimulus, other people, events, circumstances.
mhm,
So to recognize that, no, your choice is not in managing what's done to you,
mm,
but how you look at it and how you choose to respond.
mhm,
And then the fourth step has to do with the greater good. Give up the either or, win, lose. I won, you're wrong. For, everybody wins. We're the greater good, the mutual interest of all concerned.
mhm.
It's very
Well,
important to escape binary thinking and explore the relatives. Uh, I did a training for 3 years at the Orange County Sheriff's Academy
mhm,
a few years back, and I was talking about this very thing: the danger of absolutes and the importance of relativity. And some things are absolute. We can agree on some absolutes, no question.
mm,
But in what's often called the two truth doctrine, there are relative truths where that's true for me, but not for you.
sure.
Um, and yet there are a great number of people who are driven by fear and anxiety and seek security and safety in absolutes.
Mhm,
No, man, it's all right or it's all wrong. There is no variation. There's nothing in between. And so I was explaining this, and one officer objected, and he said, "No, there are absolutes. That's what the law is about."
mm,
And I said, "Well, I grant you the point, but then again, there are problems with some laws that are unjust because they
mm,
don't allow for the relative nature of things." And we went back and forth. And finally, I said to him, "Tell me this: when does small become large?
mm,
And when does fast become slow?" And of course, he was stymied because it depends.
mhm,
And he wasn't really willing to grant the point. So he said, "That's the wrong question." And I said, "Actually, that's the right question,
mm,
because when fast becomes slow or small becomes big is relative, faster than a speeding bullet, faster than the speed of light, or faster than the turtle in
mm,
the hare and the tortoise. Um, is there really such a thing as jumbo shrimp? It's it's an important field of philosophy to accept that yes, there are absolutes in the universe,
mm,
and yes, in human nature, in society, and the material world, there is relative truth, subjective truth as well.
mhm. Great. Well, thank you for that there, Michael. And now we turn to your book in particular, Fearless Intelligence. And I remind the audience now to check out your website in the bubble on the screen. And then also in the description, you can find out about Michael's work, including his various publications and so forth. So, Michael, maybe we can begin at the beginning as regards your book, Fearless Intelligence. How did you decide on that name? And what is the thesis? What is the argument that you make in that book, or what is the offering that you bring, if you don't want to phrase it in argumentation or convincing? What does your book? What is the main point of Fearless Intelligence?
The main point of fearless intelligence, and thank you for asking. I've been interviewed by a number of people about the book Fearless Intelligence, and It's rare, if ever, that they ask about the title. Fear makes us stupid.
Mm,
So fearlessness enhances intelligence.
okay.
But the overriding point, John, is that fear has nothing to do with danger. Every dictionary I've ever looked at describes fear as a response, maybe an autonomic or reflexive response to fear, to danger, to the appearance of danger or some hazard or threat, real or imagined.
Mm,
I would argue that that's not the case, that fear really has nothing to do with danger.
mm,
Necessarily, it may, but it doesn't have to. Fear is about what we don't know and don't understand. Fear is how it feels to be ignorant, to be confused. And by ignorant, I don't mean lacking the capacity to understand, I mean ignoring the information
hmm
or avoiding the information because you just don't, it challenges you and you just don't want to know it. That generates anxiety or fear.
mm,
If you ask a person, oh, Bill, Sally, what are you worried about? You seem so stressed out. What's bothering you? And they'll turn and say, I really don't know. Well, that's
mm,
the point. That's what fear is. All fear is fear of the unknown. So,
hmm
what would be the antidote? Awareness, to understand, to know. To know what? Well, two things. Situational awareness is to know the world around you to the best of your ability.
mm,
But I think much more importantly, number two is self awareness, to know thyself. And that's something few people are interested in.
mm,
Most people are terrified to understand themselves because they're afraid that all the negative voices in their head will be confirmed that you really
mm,
are bad, stupid, wrong, inadequate. Nobody likes you. You're not very smart. You're not handsome or pretty enough. And the critics in your life, the parents, the teachers, the bullies, they were all right.
mm,
That's and we just don't want to take the risk. And there's very few people promoting know thyself.
mm,
Um, and even those who might be willing to investigate the motives, the reasons why we feel the way we feel, and think and do what we do, what we think. They're not sure how to proceed. Where do I go to learn how to know myself? And
mm,
that's when people turn to spirituality often or religion.
mm,
Problem is, religion's very dogmatic and it has rules that apply to everybody. It doesn't really help you know yourself as a spiritual being, not the unique self.
mhm,
And and so that's really the best answer I can give you is that fearless intelligence is based on an understanding that fear is not about danger, but things unknown. We fear what we do not understand, and
mm.
at the core of that is the self.
And I'm impressed in your book that you step off on that foot, right? Your first chapter is "Who am I?" Getting back to your reference to the oracle, the temple there, you know thyself, and all this, and that's interesting. Whether it's education, which I'd like to bring your insight into a little bit later, how we might improve fearless intelligence in formal education and child rearing, whether it's that topic or you mentioned in the West here certain dogmatic religions. When it comes to fearlessness and a lot of that personal stuff, what strikes me, Michael, is that the institutions, uh, they seem to make the assumption, I suppose, but that whether it's the classroom or the church will say that a lot of that personal work whether it's fearlessness or knowing thyself or whatever, that work is already taken care of by the time you get to the classroom, etc. That strata of development is seen to, and people are cultivating that. And often that is not the case. And I have a second point to this, but did you have anything you wanted to bring up with that initial observation?
No, I'm not sure I fully understand what you're saying.
Okay, thank you for that opportunity to clarify.
Yeah.
Meaning you have, as you mentioned in some of your counseling with a police officer, for instance, um, the inability to grasp what you're saying about emotional intelligence, or some of the counseling you mentioned with that gentleman, and you asked him about his father, and there's all this childhood stuff and this early stuff, which it seems that various social institutions in secular modernity, they're assuming that emotional strata, or the dogmatic religion, which would seem to be somewhat useful for social ideas of belonging. But regardless, the institutions seem to assume that a lot of that personal work, or that shadow work, to use a more contemporary term, that work is being seen to, when I think in our day and age, it actually isn't being seen to, and it's leading to breakdowns in the civil or the religious spheres, that sometimes the leaders in those communities don't grasp. Did that help, or did that confuse things?
No, I think my response would have to do with what is sometimes called the breakdown of the nuclear family.
Mm.
In past centuries, if we go back to the 19th century, let's say,
Mm.
uh, family was very important. Often uh, children were encouraged because they labored on the farm. They were hired, they were unhired hands, unpaid helpers on the farm.
Mm.
But we had big nuclear families, and they ate dinner together. TV, there was no TV, there was no distraction, uh, and sat around and talked. And I think matters of character, for example, people got to know their parents better because they were around, and
Mm.
they would study mom and dad and certainly find fault with them, but also discover and admire the character that made them strong and successful, and that character would be passed on. Well,
Mm.
as we urbanized and working your farm became a job in another place, you had to commute, and then the economy got to the point where women were forced to go to work.
Mm.
Many of them chose careers, but the vast majority had to add that income to get by. This is happening around, shortly after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
I'm old enough to remember when all my friends, their moms were at home,
Mm-hmm.
not because they had rejected feminism, but that was just the traditional way a family was structured, and so you got into less trouble. I remember
Mm.
when when my parents were divorced, and me and my siblings and I lived only with my mother, and she
Mm.
had to go to work. We were tempted to raise all kinds of hell because we were alone and unsupervised. And fortunately, my mother imbued in us a very strong sense of the importance of education.
Mm-hmm.
That's what saved me from being a juvenile delinquent, was my interest in school and my feeling that I had to have a college degree. I just
Mm-hmm.
had to. It was just that or die in Vietnam in some war someplace. So I really think that's part of it, John,
Mm,
is that we don't have the role models to help develop our own character. And I think human beings generally are more. I'm speaking of America. That's the only place I know
hmm
that this missing this family structure. We're not sure who to model ourselves on, so we end up admiring rock stars or movie stars or sports heroes or
hmm
worse yet, superheroes. What the hell is with that, right?
hmm
Cartoonish what's your superpower? Well, maybe our superpower is being real and learning to discover our character. Again, as we become less fearful and more self-aware, our ethics are refined, our values are refined,
mm,
our priorities begin to change. And if we can't draw upon a nuclear family and modeling character based on
mm,
the best our parents have to show us, then we're going to have to discover it in books or TV programs or the internet someplace. And then we still have the problem of finding a good teacher. How do you find a guide or a teacher?
mm.
And there are many devoted people, from life coaches to psychotherapists and social workers, and I always and school teachers. My goodness, these are the people that I most admire. Those who have little interest in being wealthy,
Mm,
but have devoted themselves to the service of humanity and helping people develop their character.
mhm. Yes, and well, I suppose it's almost like a seesaw. This was the second part of where I was going with this. I don't know if it's much of a question so much as an observation, is that you have in the late 20th century, you have a lot of these institutions, as I see it, and perhaps by your response there, you agree somewhat, that these institutions assume that a lot of this personal work is done, and that as the 20th century ebbs away, those structures are breaking down, whether that's the family, as you mentioned, with divorce, or neighborhoods. My goodness, whatever happened to the neighborhood barbecue? I certainly don't have any remembrance of such a thing. I have no idea who my neighbors are. Um, or certainly a respect of school teachers or civil figures, whatever. As the 20th century goes on, Michael, things in these United States break down. They break down more and more. The institutions exist and they're still making the assumptions, but the reality is changing. And then you have, just going off of some of your own references in the book, you have this revival in the late 20th century into our time now, where people are realizing this and they're trying to address it. They're trying to address this poverty or this hunger that we have for community, for mindfulness, which you get so much into in the book, for fearlessness, and for really getting to getting our hands dirty with this work of the personal living that's been so neglected in the late 20th century into now. And where I was going with that was, yes, something I think about very often in other capacities is that right now, the past couple of decades, here in America, we're realizing how poor we are in these interpersonal bonds. Our family, once we get ourselves kind of straightened out, our family bonds, our neighborhood bonds, and then the communities that echo from there. So my point here with this JAG is that observation of that you just brought up right now was trying to revive this with books and with podcasts and with very helpful interviews like this one, hopefully for people. But we're trying to revive something. This is the difficulty, I think, and I'd like you to speak to this. We're trying to revive mindfulness and fearlessness, and we don't necessarily have living models. And to your point about the teachers, I wonder if you could elaborate as we move forward in time. What would you see as being you know, a good way, Michael, to develop these virtues that you bring up in your book, Fearless Intelligence? Is it through retreats? Is it through what is it through? I mean, I'm trying to wonder, how do we bring your insights, to that next level?
I think it's meditation, mindfulness, and study.
Mm,
Meditation is, I list first because it's the imperative. It's how are you going to know yourself if you don't look at yourself?
mm,
If you don't close your eyes and turn away from the chaos and frenzy of the world, and we've talked about how fear based it is,
mm,
and look within and begin to explore who you really are. And it begins, I think, with emotions. Our thinking is well educated. That's what school is.
mm,
But there's very little exposure to emotional intelligence in school or any place else. We tend to
mhm,
blame other people, project our feelings on other people.
mhm,
So if someone insults me or hurts my feelings, my tendency and that of everybody else, this speaks to the nature of the amygdala, again, the fight or flight center, is to obsess on that individual or that group or that circumstance or situation.
mm,
Try to understand the stimulus as a way of somehow indirectly understanding me as the response instead of looking directly at me and saying, well, my feeling as a result of being insulted or whatever is a response to that stimulus. So maybe I should look at me
mm,
and take ownership of that feeling instead of obsessing for more than a minute or two on, well, that person's just a jerk, or they're just
mm,
nasty, or they're having a bad day, or they didn't understand me, they presume something that isn't true. Fine, take a minute or two. But if you really want to understand the sadness, the depression that lingers,
mm,
the confusion, the empty spots in your heart,
mhm,
the sense that you have no meaning or purpose other than producing and consuming and earning and spending, you're going to have to look at yourself and want to know the significance of all these negative feelings that we would just as soon avoid. We have to again face our fear. This is Joseph Campbell's hero's journey.
mhm,
The treasure is in the cave you least wish to enter. It's dark and scary in there, but
mhm,
Carl Jung said the same thing. The treasure is in the filth.
mm,
And if you look at all the great fables, there's always a dragon guarding the gold.
mhm,
There's always a wicked witch that has imprisoned the princess in the tower.
mm,
This is not an external fear. Is this constitutes a fable because and it's so everlasting because it speaks directly to the fear of confronting yourself,
mhm,
the dragons that need to be slain, the the demons that we need to kill and slaughter are shadows within us, the failure of not understanding ourselves. That's the hero's journey.
mm,
That's what in Islam is called the jihad. The jihad is not a war against non-believers, as the fundamentalist Muslims would have you believe. The real jihad is a battle against the fear that you are corrupted, that you are evil, that you
mm,
are bad and wrong, and that you are a sinner. And to plumb the depths of that, to turn and face it. Alan Watts said, if you meet a ghost on the trail, give him a hug. That's the direction we need to move in, directly into our fear, into
mhm,
the shadows. That's all they are.
Mm,
They're just shadows. They're not substantial. What you do not know, that's the nature of fear. False evidence appearing real.
mm-hmm,
FEAR. They're shadows. They're grotesque. They're distorted. They're exaggerated, but
mm-hmm.
they're not substantial. So the irony is to find love and awareness and understanding, we need to move directly into the shadows, into the fear, confront it. That's fearless intelligence.
Mm. It's funny that you mentioned that the hero's journey and um, the author of that. Remind me right now of his name. Uh,
Joseph Campbell,
yes, Joseph Campbell. He went to school actually about a mile away from here at Canterbury through the woods there. Joseph Campbell,
really.
and in any case, it's funny you mentioned that, Michael. Today at the school here, we just started Beowulf, and you literally have the cave that Beowulf doesn't want to go into with the dragon and Grendel's mother and all this jazz. So
There
it's
you
funny
go.
that you bring that up.
There you
And
go.
you know, in your book, you bring up well, right now you bring up the Wicked Witch, or these I suppose archetypes that we find so unpleasant in ourselves, and that mud that we have to confront, and that rock that we have to overturn. In your book, you bring up an incident at a local meeting of community improvement, and you had it seemed some COINTEL people, or some people from the LAPD or whatever show up and try to challenge you. And it's very clear on that point, and you can speak to that if you like, or just in general when you were talking about, and we were talking about child rearing and education, which I'd like to bring up as our final point. Obviously the system, as far as I'm concerned, nurtures fear, not just the news media, which we began with, but the whole edifice is almost like a giant fear harvester, because it's very easy to control people. And you bring that up with your incident with the provocateurs and so forth. um and anyway, I was struck by that too, because I have an awareness of that, or how these energies are used by manipulative groups. You mentioned the jihad, and you mentioned the fundamentalist Muslims and their misunderstanding of that. And I was going to be, I was going to quip in, and also the CIA, who gins up those sorts of groups as well. But before we move to the final point of child rearing and education and fearlessness, and maybe your counsel there, Michael, um, is there a defense is there a defense just beyond meditation and so forth against these social combinations that seek, as I believe, to harvest our fear and to manipulate that for control? Is it just a matter of instilling meditation and mindfulness and study in the individual, or is there any larger, social way to fight against these combinations, or to resist these combinations that prey on our fear?
It's a great question. I believe that they are rendered powerless by awareness, insight, and understanding. This is the power and the truth and the wisdom of nonviolence
Mm,
in revolution, fomenting revolution. Uh, Gandhi's example, Christ, Martin Luther King, um, and there are others who have recognized the power of love. Love drives out evil. Love conquers evil. When you understand love is consciousness, love is awareness. It's not just an emotion. Love is not an emotion. It's awareness itself.
mm,
It's understanding. And the way it drives out evil is, once you understand love as understanding, it's easier to recognize evil as ignorance.
mm,
So, how does understanding eliminate ignorance? By virtue of what it is. How does light vaporize darkness?
mm,
How does heat conquer cold?
mm,
See, darkness is not a force, it's the absence of light. Cold, obviously, in the same way, is not a force.
Mm,
It's the absence of heat. Love is fear is the absence of love. It's ignorance. And so the antidote is understanding. And so people say to me, how do I overcome my fear? I say, you don't, you put it down.
mm,
Stuck is holding on. You're not stuck, you're holding on for dear life. Love is letting go, fear is holding on. Let go of your fear, confront it, face it, explore it. It's just ignorance,
mm,
poor, pathetic ignorance, longing for some love, some understanding. Treat your fear as if it's a little child that just had a nightmare. And what do? You embrace the child and
mm,
you gently and firmly whisper into his or her ear, it's okay. I've got you. You're safe. It
mm,
was just a bad dream. Fear is a nightmare, John. It's
mm,
just a bad dream born of ignorance and the failure to, at its core, understand who we are and what we're for.
mm,
Not only do we have the love we're looking for, we are that love.
mm. Well said. Thank you for that insight there. Now, Michael, the final point I wanted to bring up, and then of course I'll kick it over to you for your additional insights. But in terms of child rearing and so forth, a lot of our attention here at the school is particularly this semester is turning towards that, and will likely be in that neck of the woods for the next semester beyond that. When it comes to child rearing, formal education, and that most formative aspect of people's lives, I'd like your insights in terms of cultivating fearlessness, and then maybe we can bring the insights of your last chapter, the feelings dialogue. We can bring that into your response there in terms of this openness, this vulnerability, and various other aspects with that. What insights would you bring to that, to child rearing, fearlessness, and the feelings dialogue?
Wow, that's a big one, John.
Just a teaser. Of course, we'll get you back down the road for a full show on this, I suppose.
Child rearing, the most important thing I can say briefly about child rearing is listen to your children.
Mm,
Encourage them to express their feelings. Give them permission to be angry, even if it's at you.
mm,
Um, People say, I talk to my kids, I don't know what's wrong. I talk till I'm blue in the face. And I say, yeah, but do you listen?
mm-hmm,
Empower your children by respecting their dignity as human, though small, immature, young.
mm-hmm,
They deserve the same dignity as the most senior adult. Encourage them to speak, particularly express their feelings. Um, what was your second point? Schooling, education?
yeah, informal education. What practices might be helpful, whether that's formal meditation or anything else that comes to mind?
I think in education, what I would emphasize is awareness.
Mm,
There is an attempt to teach concentration, or to avoid distraction. How do I get a student's attention? How do I encourage them to concentrate? And I'm afraid most of it is wrong. Um, I can't concentrate, the student says. The teacher says, well, try harder.
mm,
Well, concentration is a relaxation skill.
mm-hmm,
You can't try to concentrate. You have to allow yourself to concentrate.
mm,
It's a relaxation skill. Educators could learn from sports psychology.
mm-hmm,
That bell shaped curve we know so well from grading, that applies to stress.
mm,
The upside of that curve, as stress increases on the horizontal axis, the performance on the vertical, the upside of that bell-shaped curve is called eustress.
Mm.
The prefix EU means good.
Mm-hmm.
Eustress. It helps us psych up. It helps us do better. Um, but there's a peak of the curve where, as the stress continues, your performance now is degraded into distress.
Mm.
So, learning to tune the instrument, so to speak, as a teacher, as a student, and
Mm-hmm.
as a partnership, is to find the peak of that curve where you can get them excited and enthusiastic and curious and benefiting from their successes and ever wanting to improve and learn more and do more, and reading is fun and learning is fun and exciting, but not overload them to
Mm.
the point that it becomes distressful. And I'll tell you, for me, college was very distressful
Mm-hmm.
because I breezed through high school just by paying attention. And then
Mm-hmm.
in college, paying attention is not enough. You have to study. And I had no idea how to.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea how to study. I learned. It took me a while. It took me a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
By my junior year, I figured it out. But boy, it was close there for a couple of years. So awareness is a relaxation skill, and teachers that can encourage the students to relax and love learning. Oh, I
Mm.
love to read. I love to learn. It's so fascinating. And also a change in the way we emphasize testing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a long issue, but testing can be real destructive. Some people are really smart and they learn, but they don't test well.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Sure.
what if the day you took the SATs, you didn't feel well, or you were stressed out, or your parents yelled at you, or the dog died? And
Mm.
you get into college and your whole life has changed because you screwed up on the SAT. No, we have to find uh, oral exams and essay exams, and there's room for multiple choice and true and false, even, but
Mm.
pop quizzes and such. But in upper school, there's orals, there's interviews, there's
Mm-hmm.
really wanting to plumb the depths of what a student knows. And if we had more financial resources allocated to school, we could do that.
Mm.
So, parenting, education. Did you have a third question?
I think you addressed the third point about the feelings dialogue in your initial response, but is there anything you wanted to add to that, child rearing, etc., in regards to the feelings dialogue that you talk about in chapter 8?
Feelings dialogue is a technique that I developed. It works for me. It's a way of using a deep meditation to visualize a particular hurt feeling or trauma,
Mm.
first as a color,
Mm.
then as a temperature and a texture. You sort of crosswire feeling into a feeling, an emotional feeling into a physical sensation,
Mm.
and then allowing your imagination to and intuition to reveal a symbolic character. You dialogue with that character that represents the feeling or set of feelings and say, what's your purpose? What do you represent?
Mm.
It's all intuition. It's intuition. Gosh, intuition in education. That's another.
Mm.
Uh, we could do a whole show just on the importance of intuition in education, but it's difficult. It takes time. It's an individual one-on-one process. It can be taught, but intuition is where we tap into the deeper self or the higher self,
Mm.
where we hear the voice of our conscience and our conscientiousness
Mm.
more clearly. And there is wisdom in conscience through intuition, we can tap into brilliant insights and really profound understandings that would not be available in normal consciousness.
Mm.
And the proof is in the pudding as you get these insights about why you feel the way you feel, then the negative feeling falls away. It doesn't exist anymore because you figured it out.
Mm-hmm.
So again, the antidote to fear is understanding.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Michael. And before we ask you for your final observations and so forth, just one final query for our audience, and that is when we do our due diligence and visit your website there, and repeatedly visit that website and learn about your most helpful work, what are some projects or a project that we can look forward to? Do you have any writings going on or any seminars or anything in this neck of the woods that might be coming down the pike?
Yeah, I've given up a lot of my content creation as I get older and more retired, but this is such an important part of my life that I'll always do something.
Mm,
What I'm centered on now, John, is private one-on-one counseling and training for individuals and couples.
mm-hmm,
Work a lot with anxiety disorders, but then I think a lot of our issues are rooted in anxiety.
mm-hmm,
And again, as I've said repeatedly, my sense of anxiety and fear and stress is that at its core, it's a product of a failure to understand ourselves, both as unique individuals and as extensions of the one life, the one thing, the absolute, above and free of form. So I do one-on-ones by phone or Zoom. I
mm-hmm,
also have a Zoom salon that meets on Saturday morning in California time,
mm,
but we have students from all over the U.S. And we even have, I'm going to say, around the world too.
mm,
Uh, that's limited to 12 people. We currently have 10,
mm-hmm.
sometimes 12, sometimes 9. It varies. I want to keep it less than 12, and we have a couple of openings now. That's much more affordable. That's tuition based also, but much more affordable.
And no
Um,
no COINTEL provocateurs are allowed on
no, no.
that.
And then, of course, all the free content. I have 88 90-minute programs
Wow.
on my YouTube channel, The Ageless Wisdom Mystery School, and a podcast that is running almost 600 episodes now, also titled The Ageless Wisdom Mystery School.
Mm,
And so that's all free. All the podcasts, all the videos are absolutely free.
mm-hmm,
And they are very comprehensive and inclusive in nature, from the most basic personal development work to the most arcane spiritual um, work and everything in between. So lots of material there. Just Google the Ageless Wisdom Mystery School or search YouTube or your favorite podcast player. And of course, it's all available at michaelbenner.com.
great. Well, thank you for that, Michael. And I'm sure the audience will do their duty and their homework there and get on with that. But before we ourselves get on to dinner and, and the rest of our day here, Michael, what would be one final note that you can leave us with? What one final nugget of wisdom concerning fearlessness, fearless intelligence, and intuition, and so forth? What would be one final thing for the road?
This universe, this universe, as Einstein proved with his most elegant E equals mc squared, is made up of energy and mass.
Mm,
To a metaphysician or a spiritually oriented person, that would be spirit and matter.
mm,
It's the same thing. Spirit is an energy. Energy is spirit. In ancient times, it was thought of as breath. That's what spiro means. Spirit
Mm.
is Latin for breath.
Mm-hmm.
Genesis begins, in the beginning there was the Word. The Word
Mm.
is breath, spoken aloud, proclaimed. So the material world is nothing but a material manifestation or outpicturing of energy or spirit.
Mm.
The material world, however, is impermanent. Nothing in the material world lasts.
Mm-hmm.
All of our physical objects are in decay. They rot, they rust,
Mm.
they corrode. Ideas don't last. Emotions don't last. And maybe most importantly, our desire nature is never completely fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the most important awarenesses, to recognize that the majority of our stress is rooted in the treadmill, the hamster cage of trying to find happiness in the material world and fulfill ourselves by buying stuff and owning stuff and possessing and repairing and replacing. And when you do get that thing you really, really want, it does fulfill you, but never for very long before that desire for something else, that hunger, John, for
Mm.
something new and different. It's to recognize that and appreciate that desires will never be filled from anything in the material world, because none of it's real. It's relatively real, subjectively true,
Mm-hmm.
but not absolutely, because it's impermanent. It's all in decay. The spiritual world, on the other hand, the world of energy,
Mm-hmm.
well, we know basic physics. You cannot create nor destroy energy.
Mm-hmm.
Consciousness cannot be created nor destroyed. Consciousness is absolute and everlasting. There is no birth, there is no death.
Mm.
We are not born and we do not die. To understand that the material world is an extension of the spiritual world or the energy world, in the same way ice is water vapor.
Mm.
The same humidity that forms the cloud can alter its state and become liquid water or solid ice.
Mm-hmm.
That you, I used to live in Michigan. I know about scraping that stuff off the windshield. It clings, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Just like a fearful person clings. So the material world is a state.
Mm.
Its truth is in its energy nature, its spiritual nature. Knowing yourself first as an individual, a unique material being, is just the beginning.
Mm.
What it leads to is an understanding of a higher self that is not separate from anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that consciousness, that awareness is called love.
Mm.
I'd sum it up that way.
Great. Well, Michael, thank you very much for your insight there. And I'd like to hang on after we knock off. We're going to have a quick chit chat here. But to the audience, thank you for your attention and thank you for checking out Michael's site and purchasing his books and perhaps attending a seminar or a coaching session. That's all available at the website there in the bubble and the description. And after about 6 or 7 months of checking out Michael's site, then you can mosey on over to the website of the Institute here at bucketsofstacysinstitute.wordpress.com, and you can check out our philosophy tab. You can also, speaking of fearlessness, check out our Fearlessness Center, which initially got Michael here and I in contact with each other. So check out those fine websites there, and especially to yourself, Michael. Thank you for really helping us hone our understanding of fear, fearlessness, and how to discourage the one and to grow the other. Thank you so much.
John, thank you. I most appreciate it.